This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
The voice of the UK.
Lisa McCormick.
Listen on BBC Sounds.
Let's take a look at the week's big story, and that's a report into the Grenfell fire. It concluded that the 72 people who lost their lives in the fire in 2017 died because of decades of failure by governments, companies and organisations in the building industry. This was a 6-year public inquiry. It was chaired by Sir Martin Moore-Bick. It found that the path to disaster at Grenfell went as far back as the early 1990s. Well, attention is now turning to the campaign for justice. Grenfell United, which is a group that represents some victims of the fire, says that justice hasn't been delivered. The Crown Prosecution Service says that any decisions and criminal charges won't be made until 2026. Well, meanwhile, the government says thousands of buildings across England still have the highly flammable cladding that made the fire at Grenfell Tower so much worse. Of the more than 4,600 buildings, only 29% have been fixed, and work hasn't started on half of the rest. Well, Giles Grover's from the pressure group End Our Cladding Scandal is based in Manchester, and I spoke to him a bit earlier on and started by asking for his reaction to this report.
It's essentially telling us what we knew all along. Anyone who's seen any of the evidence sessions from the inquiry, from the report, will know that the successive governments were responsible for this, and there's many actors, individuals, industry, politicians, officials who all have some culpability. And as we've said all along, as Grenfell families have said, those deaths were avoidable. Those deaths were entirely avoidable. So we now just need to see justice for the families, and we just need to see meaningful change, and this government needs to deliver that and get on with it.
Giles, what does justice look like?
So there's two elements to this, and number one, it's for the families. It's charges being brought swiftly. It doesn't look like we'll see those until 2026 or 27. There was some concern from the families that the delays, the report, the time it took to publish means that the people that might well have charges brought against them may well, have been time to work on the defence. So if we kind of then look at the issues that we face across the country, Grenfell exposed it started as a cladding scandal. It's now a building safety crisis. So justice means people being able to live safely in their homes and residents finally being respected rather than just being at the bottom of the food chain as we have been for 20, 30 years, really.
Yeah, let's break that down then into the two things you've mentioned there. First of all, the criminal charges that potentially could be brought. That's going to be a decade after the disaster if charges are brought. I mean, is that good enough, do you think?
No, essentially, justice delayed is justice denied. I think that's the simple, precept of morality. And having to wait 10 years, knowing full well the specific individuals that charges should be brought against. I mean, whether it's the government, whether it's the police, I understand the reasons that have been given, but you're going to have to wait another 2 years, sift through thousands of documents when we all know, who the guilty parties are.
Do you have a bit of an idea of how many buildings still have that dangerous cladding?
Yeah, and this is the thing that the government estimated a couple of years ago, and they've repeated those estimates in July 2024, saying there's 11,000 unsafe buildings over 11 metres. So far, they're only monitoring 4,630 of them. So we're not even halfway to really getting a grip on the handle of how many unsafe buildings there are across the country. Then you've got further issues with the ones that they're monitoring in terms of they're not looking at non-cladding defects. As we said all along, what started as a cladding scandal soon became a full-blown building safety crisis. And then you've got thousands, tens of thousands potentially buildings under 11 metres where there's just no help. Despite all the causal issues being exactly the same, there's no funding solution at the end of it. So what we just need is a simple kind of one-stop shop almost to say, if you've got issues with your building, it goes into this scheme, it gets fixed fully, inside and outside, whatever the defect is, you can then have that certainty. Because right now the approach is just perverse and complicated. The approach of the previous government, I should say.
That's a lot of buildings. A lot of people living in those buildings will be, very fearful. And I know there's also people who would like to move out of those buildings, but they can't because they can't get rid of their flats for that. There's many issues here, really, aren't there?
Yeah, and that's the thing that, sometimes I'll have to, chastise myself because I just end up talking about numbers of buildings, billions of pounds, when it is about the people. It's about the residents. Look at the fire in Dagenham last week. People made homeless, potentially could have lost their life. And we're still relying too much on luck, to be honest. Even when Sir Keir Starmer just finished making his statement, there was then another fire in Catford that spread to the 9th to the 10th floor, or it looks like. So we told the government, that this is sort of Keir Starmer's first warning. Lots of that many prime ministers, that many housing secretaries, they've all had warnings. They've all said the nice things, the warm words, but we need sort of meaningful change on the ground. And we've shown the government how to do it. The previous government, we published a manifesto. It's actually much more simpler than they make it out. And there's billions out there. Further funding's required. You can extend the levy to the product manufacturers, which Michael Gove said he'd do. So, but just going back to, I'm talking about buildings and billions again, but it is the people. Right now, you're looking at about 172,000 flats, around 300 to 350,000 people. But the buildings, there's still thousands of buildings being assessed. There's still people who don't know whether their homes are safe or not. That's a very simple human right. It's just a basic thought to have a sanctuary where you can be safe. If you look at some of us in our homes are unsafe for 7 years, even through the pandemic, where you sat in your flat and you're thinking, I'd be safer outside during a raging pandemic than I am inside. So you're trapped, whether it's financially, physically, but it's the mental health impact that often gets forgotten about, because you can't sell, you can't insure, you can rent it out, you can become a landlord, which is just feels kind of a bit weird. But then, you're trying to step up and you can't step up to you can't move on with your life. Your life choices are impacted, your lives are impacted. And it's people from all walks of life. It's, young people, young families trying to grow, even pensioners trying to downsize. But we've got too many layers of protection, too many different complicated funding schemes that no one's really knows who's going to fix the building, who's going to make their home safe and when. And that's the issue that this government needs to really get a grip of.
Yeah. Giles, this might sound like a really stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because,
Sure.
I'm sitting thinking to myself, if I were in that position, is there any sort of mitigating measures that can be taken, or are you just sort of feeling like a sitting duck if you're in that position?
There are mitigating measures out there. The difficulty is that as soon as you've told your home's unsafe, oftentimes you just realise that because you'll see a few people walking around in high-vis jackets called the waking watch, because they're getting paid to just walk around your building, inside your building, to check there's no smoke or fire. Oftentimes they're just kind of security guards who haven't really had the training. So you kind of then spend the money on that, and the leaseholders, the residents, they have to pay for that. You can then get alarms fitted. Whether that removes the need for a waking watch or evacuation management or not, we don't know. So that's kind of the problem, the scale of the crisis. The government spent years diminishing the scale of this crisis and just saying, okay, it's only ACN, it's only over 80-metre buildings. Okay, we better look at other buildings and other issues. And that is where we go, ACM, HPL, timber, I could go on and on, non-cladding defects, mid-rise, low-rise. But there's still too many gaps in the protections, and we still just need this government now. The data's got slightly better, but just to say, okay, no more, Keir Starmer's admitted that, successive governments were at fault. He's saying building safety is his responsibility in the Commons. So now this is where we need him just to say yes, to give Angela Rayner the authority to just crack on and deliver a proper solution that will actually help us. Because right now we're just sat in the middle of developers, freeholders, insurers, lawyers, housing associations. Everyone's just self-interested, and we're the ones just sort of waiting, struggling to get answers. So yeah, it's kind of depressing really, but we're hopeful. It's the darkest, it's always darkest before dawn. But yeah, the government's been in place for 2 months. We've got to wait and see, I suppose.
I was going to ask you that. Are you feeling, in any way hopeful now? I know this government, you're right, has just been in just over 2 months now. Are you feeling that maybe you might be listened to?
It depends what time of day you ask me, to be honest. I think the annoying thing is, and I understand how politics works. I've been doing this for that long that I get how it all works in terms of you can support us all you want in opposition, but when you get to government, that's when the difficult decisions got to be made. Are we going to be one of those difficult decisions? I'm hopeful not, because we've had that much engagement with the shadow housing team. A lot of the MPs who are now on the front bench, they're the ones who've been supporting us in our cities, whether it's Leeds, Manchester, London, Liverpool, Birmingham, etc., etc. The Metro mayors now as well, they're in place. We've got councils on our side, so we can. I think we can do this. The difficulty is that it's been a bit quiet since we met Rush and Lee at the end of July. Very much an introductory meeting. Angela Wren has now started speaking about it because after the fire in Dagenham, I think the media management from Sir Keir, possibly Sue Gray, was to wait until the Grenfell Tower Inquiry report before they start saying anything. So I'm hopeful, and I think I hear whispers, nothing's off the table. But the meeting we had last year, Labour said, even this year, it's their principled belief that no leaseholder should pay for cladding. No leaseholder should pay for cladding or non-cladding defects irrespective of circumstance, and that includes the ones below 11 metres. However, because they're worried about unfunded spending commitments, they watered that down to really high-level words in the manifesto. And we're still remaining hopeful that's enabling language so they can do what needs to be done, because the mechanisms are in place, the money's out there. And it is a lot of this about just getting a grip and saying, right, we're going to have consequences, deadlines, penalties, so everyone knows that there's a pathway to full remediation of their homes. Because right now you're still trying to struggle. The law is just too complicated. And you're like, is my freeholder going to pay? Is my developer going to pay? Am I going to have to pay? What sort of defect is it? There's just too much complexity and too many other people who are focused on covering their backside. And we're the ones just sat here in unsafe homes. Quite depressing, really.
Well, Giles, I do hope that the delivery of this report does speed up any kind of processes anyway. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us.
Sure, no problem. Thank you for having me.
Giles Grover there, who's from the pressure group End Our Cladding Scandal.